Hello. I think the internet connection is a little bit ropey. Hopefully, you can hear me and you can see me. Jump in the chat if you can. And if you're I think the internet's having a few issues. Yeah, if you can hear me and if you can see me, I hope you can because my internet is struggling a little bit. Please do jump in the chat. I'm not currently using my webcam because it hasn't connected. I've done this a little bit hastily based on the news. So jump in the chat if you can. But we're here to talk about Newcastle possibly getting two new players, Will Osula from Sheffield United and Marc Guehi today, which is just broke from David Ornstein, which is why really I'm here to talk about this from Crystal Palace. So yeah, I hope you can, as I say, I hope you can see me and hear me and everything because my internet seems to be struggling. I might just jump back out if no one is coming into the chat. I'm not sure if you can see. There's a couple of you in here I can see. Yeah, jump in the chat if you can see, because I can see a few of you in, but no one's in the chat, and my internet's struggling, so I don't know if you guys can hear me. Please jump in the chat. Oh, fantastic. Great. Hi, Daniel. So, okay then. What do we think about Will Osula and Marc Guehi? Both very different sort of ends of the spectrum, I think, in terms of the transfer situation. Wouldn't you agree? I think, given the fact that, thank you, Matt, cheers. Given the fact that that we said or I said on Thursday's show that Osula or transfers generally were going to be quiet, and then they've gone in and got Osula pretty much done, which we mentioned on the Monday show. That actually happened straight after I was about to upload. If you follow me on Twitter, you can probably notice that. And then also, Guehi today is just broken. It's a bit of a surprise, the Guehi one, because obviously we know that he's been linked before. Newcastle are big fans of his, but in a position where we thought they were looking at Thiaw, and they're still in talks with Thiaw. It doesn't mean anything. The conversations have been basically opened with Guehi. It's likely that he's going to be the big chunk of the money in the summer if he comes, because he's 60 million. It's, as I say, it's a surprise. Let me know in the chat if you what you think of the deal, the two deals. I think Osula sort of covered on Monday's show and sort of said that I think he's a good signing. It's a sign of the times. It's a sign of where Newcastle are in terms of what they're looking for the striker. They were going to be part of something for looking for David, or looking for another striker potentially, or a big right winger. That sort of puts that to bed, because and it probably means that they're struggling to sell Callum Wilson as well because of his injury. So Osula is somebody who really makes sense in the fact that he's going to come in and learn from Isak, learn from from Wilson. I wouldn't judge him on last season's stats, because the way that played out, Sheffield United was so poor. They only scored 35 goals. It was his first full season in the Premier League, first full season, I think, actually playing for Sheffield United after being on loan at Derby. So he's very raw, and you can't expect too much from him. But the Guehi one is where it's really, really interesting. Daniel says, if Osula comes in as a third striker, it's excellent. If Osula's coming in to replace Wilson, that's another thing. I think that's probably fair, but I think the fact that they've gone through Osula, again, I don't know this. I can't guarantee this. But I think that the fact that they've gone for Osula means that they can't sell Wilson, or they understand they're unlikely to sell Wilson because of his injury. Obviously, he's had back surgery. He's out for a month. There's only about a month left of the window. There's doubts over whether he over the amount of interest in him beyond Saudi Arabia anymore. There's been an inquiry from West Ham, but beyond that, not much else. So I think to answer Daniel's point, it would mean, to me at least, that Wilson's sticking around, and that would be a decent option, I think, because I think, let's be honest, with Osula and with Wilson last season, it wasn't in terms of, with Osula coming in, it would be just another body who could play up front, and in circumstances when, hopefully that it wouldn't come to this, but when Isak is not there, or as Wilson's not there, that was the problem last season, was that, and the season before, that there was times when both of them were not fit, and one of them was coming back when the other one was getting injured, and neither of them really were able to get back to full fitness. Hopefully, in the rare occurrence that they're both injured, Osula can come in and do this and ease the situation and make it feel a little bit better. So yeah, I think that's why this one makes sense a little bit. This is a very haphazard live stream, by the way. I didn't expect to be doing this half an hour ago. That's why the camera's not set up properly. That's why I started really slow, because my internet's acting up and it doesn't look like it seems to be settled down now. But yeah, I have got a few things. Let's talk about Marc Guehi, though. Please do put things in the chat. So again, if anyone who watched the scheduled one from Wednesday, I didn't place my laptop in a particularly good place where I could see the live stream particularly well. So that's why I was in a position where I couldn't really read so many comments, and there was loads of comments in there. I looked afterwards, and there was loads of comments that I hadn't actually realised. And so it wasn't anything personal. If you dropped something in the chat on Wednesday and I didn't answer it, it wasn't anything personal. It was just purely that I didn't see it, and there were so many of them. Whereas, because this one's a little bit haphazard, obviously fewer people are queuing up. So it's good to get a couple of bits in here. Matt's comment on Guehi playing left centre back, but is right-footed. Yeah, that. I think there is a point there with that. For me, I do understand that as a complaint, as a concern, maybe not complaint, because that's what Newcastle have been looking for all summer, is somebody, and they've looked for that sort of left and right thing, and that's very tactically quite common now, and tactically quite important to have that sort of left and right thing. So that makes a lot of sense to me that's a concern, and I think ultimately, let's get this lamp out of the way. Ultimately, that I understand why that's a question mark. For me, though, I think his physicality and the fact that, as Daniel's just pointed out, he's the best player for England at the Euros, that sort of outweighs that issue. It's sort of similar to what I've been saying. If you watch my video on Daniel Marlin playing on the right hand side as an ideal signing from there, for me, the fact that he's right-footed is one factor that you could take into account, but the other things outweigh what he brings. He scored 13 goals in the Bundesliga. It's very similar for me. If they get Guehi, it's the physicality, it's the pace, it's the ability to bring the ball out. He's very good on possession. He's very, very good just in generally everything that Newcastle have been looking for in a centre half. He sort of answers all those points, all those questions. So for me, I think that's a fair point about the right-footed thing. But given that there aren't many players on the market that Newcastle could get and look at seriously, who would offer the pace that he would, who would offer the strength that he would, who would offer the everything else in terms of all those things that he would. I think that's why they're probably looking at this. And let's stress that this is just talks, and they're still talking to Milan about Malik Thiaw. They've got a list of players that they've built from last summer, that none of whom seem to be particularly heavily linked now, but they have had a long, hard look at this position. And we mentioned on Wednesday about Branthwaite and Todibo, other players. So there's plenty here to talk about with in terms of these options. So I think Guehi would make sense, but it would completely sort of flip the whole transfer situation. I want you guys to answer this in the chat if you can. Would you, again, it's a sort of similar question that I posed it's a sort of similar idea where I'll pose a question into the chat and you just answer it and I'll read out the responses. Given that this would flip the whole thing on its head in terms of, you know, the bigger slice of the money that Newcastle have, and also, by the way, the fact that Osula is their striker target means that that's freeing up a good 20 million that they might have had to pay for a striker to go on a potential winger. So they'll look at going big for a winger as well. But this is bigger than I was expecting them to look at if they get Guehi for a centre half. 60 million is release clause, and that's probably the minimum that Palace they won't negotiate anything on that. So would you take a lesser winger if it meant that Guehi came in at 60 million and that the biggest chunk of the money was actually paid for the centre half? Because the back four, with Hall, who I mentioned yesterday on the Thursday show about how I expect him to have a big season, and then also Livramento on the other side. Trippier's still around. Whether he stays, obviously, is remains to be seen. But in terms of all that sort of thing, what would you think about that? What do you think about the idea that Newcastle are going to go big on a centre half rather than a winger, given that everything is sort of pointing to the winger and the need for a winger has probably been a lot more profound ever since the takeover. Really, they haven't strengthened on that right hand side, whereas at least they've brought in Botman to transform the centre back situation, and Burn as well, obviously, in centre half. So there's been strengthening of the defence quite consistently over the last 2 years, whereas right winger is still something that is as strong as it was or as weak as it was, depending on your viewpoint. After the takeover, so obviously Murphy's form, brilliant form towards the end of last season, a lot of assists, and then pre-season looks good. But I think we know what we're going to get from Murphy. I think he thrives in the sort of squad role. There's a couple of responses. Yes, I think if it was for Guehi, that's Captain Keith Hart, I think. Sorry, again, I might have to boost the zoom for this chat because my eyesight is terrible. People might not be aware of that, but it's absolutely shocking. So I'm just going to boost the zoom so I can read the live chat a bit better. James has said, can't see us being in for Guehi if it means, if I'm being honest, we would have to pay a fortune considering his performances for England. But James, the point is that does the fortune change because he's got a release clause in his contract? So it's 60 million before or after the Euros. Maybe the value changes. Does the value change a bit? In terms of does he become worth more because he's playing because of the summer he had for England, even though Palace don't have any jurisdiction over what they're getting in terms of more than 60 million because of that release clause. I think that it's a really interesting thing. I think the point about the footedness is interesting, but as I say, I think the fact that he would transfer, because he's one of those, Newcastle are looking for a defender to transform the way their defence is. They got that with Botman, who allowed them to bring the ball out from the back and just have that sort of classy and calm nature, a bit like Cher, but on a higher level, I would argue. And I think now they're looking at the same sort of thing but in terms of pace and physicality and that, because that's what Newcastle have struggled with in the last 2 years, isn't it? So yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting thing. What about Osula then? What do you think of that? Do you agree with my assessment? Bear in mind that I've said on the videos I've done, I'm not going to tell you anything or pretend to know things that I don't. But I do know a fair bit about Osula relative to what there is out there, because I watched a lot of Sheffield United for World Class season. I was at Bramall Lane a lot. Sorry, Terry, I'll push it down a bit if you can. Is that better? Can you see my mouth? Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I know a bit about Osula, so I'm fairly happy with that deal if it happens, because I understand what he represents. I sort of sense there's a sort of, and I think the Guehi news might change things around a little bit for this, in terms of the Guehi news might make things a little bit better for taking in the Osula news, because the fact that there's only been Kelly coming in and then there's not been a big marquee signing. If Guehi comes as well, maybe that'll change the perception. But for me, Osula is a really good option for what he is, but he's not in a position, and Newcastle aren't in a position to be ready with him going into the season. That's why I think, to the earlier point, he isn't a replacement for Wilson, and he will be a third choice. I wonder if Wilson hadn't got injured, whether there'd be a sense of going and getting someone like Jonathan David or somebody else who's a bit more expensive and a bit more demanding. The thing about Osula is he can get to the point with him where he's not going to demand too much football. So I think that's actually a decent point. It's a good point, James, about the negotiations. Maybe we are. I think we will try and get a bit of a lower price if possible. But my point about the release clause is that there's no top we can go with. James, by the way, if you can't see it in the chat, it's just said, why would we be in negotiations with Palace if there's a release clause? Because you would try and get him for lower. You could try, if you tried to get him for 40 or 45 or something closer to what they're trying to pay for Thiaw, then perhaps. But I think, for me, I think if I was Palace, I would stick at 60. And I think this is where maybe, again, we can stress that it's just talks at this point. So there's no suggestion that there's any breakthrough. There's no suggestion that he's pushing for this move or whatever. But Newcastle, I think David Ornstein said, are the first team to sit down and have this conversation. Maybe they'll pay the release clause, because that's what they were going to do for Elise, or did for Elise. They just paid the release clause and they talked to him and he went to buy him. So whether I think the negotiations would be to suggest that he is that Newcastle are trying to push it down a little bit. But ultimately, where, I think if it was, well, as it was with Bruno, we've told Man City, right, that Newcastle told Man City all summer, or anyone who will listen, it's 100 or nothing. So if you're Palace, it's 60 or nothing, and perhaps that will be ultimately an issue for Newcastle going away. As I say, they are still interested in Thiaw. They still have a list of potential options. So the only reason I could suggest that they'd be going they would be talking to Palace at all is to get a lower fee if they can possibly. James asked, did Osula play on the wing for Sheffield United? He can play on the wing, but mainly when I saw him, it was in the first half of the season when they were playing 4-5-1, or sort of more like 10-0-1 or 9-0-1, because they really it was damage limitation from the start, given that they'd come into the season having sold their two best players, and I think there was a sense that they were going to struggle. And Osula played up front alone under Paul Heckingbottom, and then when Wilder came in, he sort of took him out of the firing line a little bit and played him sometimes on the left and on the wing, but mainly it was Brereton Diaz with with McBurney up front in a 2, from what I remember. And that actually gave them a little bit more. Berrington Diaz has obviously just got to Sheffield. He's got to Southampton. Scored 6 goals in 14 games. So that shows you the different level in terms of what the experience is and the demands. But also, players talk about being in better surroundings and having better players around them, and that helping massively. And I think that's going to be crucial. So yes, he did play on the wing at times, and he can play on the wing, but he's mainly a striker. So yeah, I'm just going to go through the chat to get some earlier things, because as I say, Wednesday, I missed quite a few comments and questions because I couldn't see them. So yeah, there was just so many of them. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, isn't it, to see where Newcastle go from here in terms of what it would mean for their right midfielder. So a couple of you said that you would go for it if it was Guehi. Do you think Guehi is worth 60 million, first of all, actually? And has that changed because of the Euros? Because I think a lot of people, myself included, when the Euros squad was announced, Guehi was obviously going to be in there, but we weren't sure if Maguire was going to be fit. Maguire if he was fit, was probably going to play alongside Stones. The fact that he wasn't fit meant that Guehi sort of came in, but he took it brilliantly, didn't he? I think he really performed. He was probably England's player of the tournament, the way he played. Has that changed your mind in terms of how much he's worth and whether you would go for him? What do you think? That's all right, James. Thanks for the question. Gary has asked, in the meantime, they won't spend on a right centre back at the expense of a right winger. Would be big on both in that scenario. Might not be much available at right wing, so switch to right centre back. That's a really, really sensible point, Gary. Actually, how much, because we haven't heard much. We've heard names and we know of certain interest. Again, I can tell you that they do like certain players, but I couldn't tell you that they have gone for them. So, like, I could tell you that they've gone for they like Neto, but they haven't made them, and it's getting to the point where Neto is at the higher end, and Wolves are less likely to sell now than maybe they would be in July. So those sorts of factors are always going to be kind of interesting. So maybe that's a really good point that Gary's raised. I think actually suggests that maybe they're looking at that they've looked for more value in centre halves. I said, and I still stand by this though, actually, from Wednesday, that that I think that in terms of value, you can get more out of centre half. So, Teao being, by the sounds of it, possibly half the price of Guehi, would mean that you could go a bit bigger on the right winger. But that's, again, like, I'll throw hypotheticals out there. Would you prefer, I don't know, Mbumo and Teao as a pair? So Teao is the cheaper and Mbumo at 50, let's say, hypothetically. Or would you prefer Guehi and, say, Madueke, who's sort of the split would be 60, 20, 30? What do you think about that? Because for me, I think you've got more value out of a centre half than you do a right midfielder in that scenario. So I think there's it's better to go for a bigger on a right winger. But that's just my opinion, and I'm certainly not suggesting that there's no good reason to go for Marc Guehi, because, as I say, he's a phenomenal centre half, and it really does show that. Again, I think it's another crucial point to make, is it shows that Newcastle aren't going in for these players and opening these talks for Palace, for two key Palace players, formerly Elise and now Guehi, they're not just entertaining these situations in the hope that they can get them cheaper. As I say, there have been negotiations to try and lower the fee maybe for Guehi, but they know that they can get him for 60. Elise say it was never, there was no point in doing that because there was so much other concrete interest. Bayern and Chelsea had already also exercised the clause, so it was kind of like go 60 or go nothing. But the fact that they're even talking about these players and trying to get these players suggests that they know that they're going to have to pay big for somebody along the line. And it shows, again, like I said in yesterday's video, just because there's no talks on social media and there's no Twitter rumors and there's nothing to really get excited about, which there has been at pretty much every other point beyond January when nothing happened throughout the window. And that's what's fed this whole thing. It's always felt like there's something to grab onto. Because that's not really happened this summer, I think people have started to fret a little bit. But the fact that these two things have come out in the last 2 days suggests that maybe something is brewing. And obviously here we are with David Ornstein announcing talks. Again, I'll stress they're just talks. But it feels like we're in a position where we know now that Newcastle are meaning business, and they've waited a little bit of time to manage the market. So yeah, go on, answer the question in the chat if you can about what you think Teao or about the Teao and Mbumo or Madueke and Guehi. Again, they're just hypotheticals. What I'm trying to say is, would you go bigger on a centre half or bigger on a right winger if you had to? Again, the other thing to say is that Osula's coming in for a cheap price. Then they realised that they would have had to pay for a David or somebody else who was potentially for potentially a third striker. I think it's been a really, really good couple of days to show that Newcastle. Also, there's also talks. May as well, while we're here, talk about the talks that there could be with Anthony Gordon and his contract situation. So Newcastle have apparently opened or are interested in opening talks for the new contract over Gordon, and that would solve the problem that I mentioned on the live stream and then again on the Thursday show, that Newcastle are sort of teetering around their control over the situation with Gordon. It's fine at the moment to say that Gordon, Newcastle can set whatever price they want or not, or choose whatever they want to do in terms of Gordon, but that won't last because of the situation that of his contract. So if Newcastle can pin him down to a new contract, but it will, again, he's another of those players that will demand the similar. They could be in a very similar situation to what they were in with Joe Linton and what they were in with Bruno Guimaraes, where they sort of lock horns for a bit because they're trying to manage their wage structure, and he's going to want to be in and around the top earners, which is around 180 grand. So yeah, been a good couple of days. Again, keep the comments coming. For me, I think Marc Guehi makes a big difference to the defence, but I also think that there's probably what somebody said in the last chat, which was that if they had to sell Bruno, there's better replacements, better alternatives out there than there is if you had to sell Isak. Again, the context was, again, the sort of one of these horrible things that I've asked you to make the choices. And somebody made a really good point about saying that there's more players out there who can do what Bruno does than there is who can do what Isak can. And I'd say that, again, I think if Teao came in, he would have as good, maybe not as good, but a solid impact at Newcastle in a way that Guehi would, or somebody else like that would. Whereas there's a lot less in terms of options for a striker, for a right midfielder who could make an impact. Daniel says, do you think Gordon will actually sign a new contract, though? I think probably always his plan to move on after 2 years. Else he would have signed a 3.5-year contract. Else he would have signed a long contract initially. That's from Daniel, and I really actually understand that completely, to be honest. I understand that concern, because there's got to be a reason why given that Newcastle, even pre-takeovers, it's always been a thing that Newcastle have done. That was one of the sort of decent things that Ashley did, was he signed players to decent contracts. And they carried that on. And it's an outlier that Gordon a deal and never really been explained. I think, and the Liverpool interest, you might, as I said on the last live stream, you might hedge his bets and say, look, I'm gonna stay here. Sorry, I'm gonna leave or stay here until I gain control and then leave. And make it easy to leave for Liverpool in whenever. But I think he would be open to a new deal because he's loved at Newcastle. He loves being at Newcastle. It suits him really well. He's got a young family that's settled. All those things. And the club is going somewhere. The club is on an upward trajectory. And he's actually, the other point to link Gordon and Guehi, if you remember, during the Euros, there was actually quotes from Gordon that said that he wanted Guehi to sign. So imagine if Guehi signs, potentially that might help Gordon stay. Who knows? But I understand that problem, that potential issue with Gordon's contract. But I think I do think there's a possibility that he signs a new deal as well. Any other thoughts on Guehi or Gordon and Osula as well? I mean, again, what about Osula? I mean, are you happy? Would you rather that Newcastle went a bit bigger on a striker and got a more proven striker? Because I mean, do you trust Osula to come in and play up front if God forbid Isak and Wilson are injured? The other thing to say is that I think there is a sort of a slight similarity. I wouldn't say that they are identical players, but there is a slight similarity between the way that Osula and Isak play. So it sort of allows tactical flexibility and tactical continuity, if you like. But I think it's a very, very interesting situation. Yeah, keep any questions you got in the chat. The chat's a little bit slower this time than it was naturally because I appreciate I didn't give you any prior warning beyond 15 minutes that I was going to do this, because I kind of didn't want to be in a position like I was a few weeks ago. If you watch the videos, I got into the point where I think I did a video on that. It was at the time when I was only doing one Newcastle video a week, and I think the Elise interest broke on the Tuesday or the Wednesday, and I didn't talk about it till the following Monday. So I'm looking for trying to do these things to try and get to kind of keep things a bit fresh and have a bit more instant reaction and instant talk with you guys. That's a really good point from Captain as well. For all we know, Paul Mitchell might have already identified a quality right midfielder. Exactly. We don't really know what Paul Mitchell has done, but the only thing that I would say, again, it's less about what there is and the news there is, but you've just got to see, you've just got to understand and follow the nuances that have happened this summer. So, like, questions about what Newcastle will do in the summer and how Newcastle will act and how Newcastle will go about their business and whether they'll do anything. There have been legitimate questions and worries of Newcastle not doing anything this summer, but the context has always been that they've got Paul Mitchell in, and Paul Mitchell is one of, if not the most sought after director of football or recruitment guru, if you like, in the world. And have actually rejected big offers. So why is he coming in now if Newcastle are going to do nothing? And he's not also coming in with no knowledge of markets that, with no knowledge of what Newcastle want or need, and no knowledge of the required market. So I think that's absolutely a fair point. But yeah, the other point about Gordon, when I watched the from Daniel. When I was to go on an interview with Neville, I thought it was self-promotion. He was setting himself for a future move. I think he is quite an ambitious guy, but I will say that I think the idea. I think Newcastle have got some answering to do here with the whole Gordon situation. I think they dangled this idea of a move to Liverpool, and imagine you're a professional footballer elsewhere, and someone dangles the idea of moving to Newcastle in front of you, and then sort of seemingly takes it away. Like that's going to play on your mind a little bit if you see yourself playing one day or dream of playing for Newcastle. In his case, he probably dreams of playing for Liverpool. So I would argue that that's probably more where this has come from. But you know, who knows? Who knows? I think for me, there's definitely more positivity, and it feels like there's a sense of something a little bit better is brewing after some quiet weeks. But I think, as I say, as I've said before, like you've got to think of the nuances, like the fact that Staveley and Caducey have gone, and suddenly it's a little quieter on the fact that people don't know as much and things aren't coming out as much, and that's a positive thing. And Newcastle have always done their best work out of nowhere, and there's been 2 transfer rumours that have come from different breaking sources in the last 2 days, and they've not come from people who are more traditionally inside the club. And I think that that's quite telling about how these things are probably more easily got from the player side or from the buying club side. Staveley stated that it was Liverpool that approached, not the other way around, chance around our PSR situation. That is true. I think it probably is. There's yeah, but at the same time, Chelsea did the same thing with Isak, and there's no talk about Isak going because they shut that down a lot quicker. They did talk. They actually had conversations with Liverpool about Gordon going. They wanted Kwanzaa, and they talked about possibly getting Gomez out. And by the way, the PSR whole, if you actually just to touch on the PSR situation, the whole thing about the PSR thing, which is quite interesting, is that they looked at the players that they were willing to sell. So Minter was obviously one, Elliot Anderson was another one, and they always tried to get something. So there was the rumor with Anderson going to Wolves and then getting Kilman, who's a centre back. So they were always looking at trying to get players in who could offer something to the positions that they needed, and that's why Kwanzaa and Gomez were so heavily linked when Newcastle, when Liverpool wanted to talk about Gordon. So they did sit down, and that's what I'm talking about. And there are conflating suggestions from different people to say who started that conversation, but it doesn't really matter. What ultimately matters is that Newcastle answered the call, and it does sort of feel a little bit like we're in a situation where they have some damage limitation, but that damage limitation could be a new contract. Like it could be something that he's really after a big, he's using Liverpool's interest and not sort of. And again, it's all noises. He's not actually said anything, but it's consistent noise. Maybe what he would take from Newcastle to stay would be a new contract. Who knows? But ultimately, I think Gordon will start the season with Newcastle, and I think he'll stay this season. But actually, the bigger problem if they don't sign a new contract is what happens next year when Liverpool might look at it and say, well, his value's gone down, he's only got a year in his contract, and he might be willing to wait it out. But also, what happens to Newcastle in those 2 years is crucial. And this is what I said about Bruno and Isak as well. These guys are at a point, in Newcastle's season is at a point where they have to deliver something, because there's pressure this season that probably wasn't last year in terms of finishing in the top 4. I don't even think the top 6 is really enough for now for the third full season when they want to be challenging and winning titles eventually. So, and that's probably the case not just for the PIF and for the ownership and the top brass, but also for Bruno, Isak and Gordon. and others as well. But we've been here with Joe Linton, haven't we? We've been here for Joe Linton because Joe Linton was like, there's loads of talk about what he wanted and whether he was going to go somewhere. And there's like slight links with like PSG and other sort of like decent sized clubs from abroad, but he never went anywhere. And eventually, he just signed the contract because Newcastle eventually coughed up the money he wanted. And I think the fact that Gordon is settled at Newcastle, and if Liverpool wasn't a thing, I honestly believe if this thing with Liverpool wasn't a thing, we wouldn't even be talking about Gordon going anywhere. But they do need to sign to a new contract anyway, regardless, because of the fact that it's so low down that it's only 2 years, and there is a really good point. Apologies, who can't remember who said it in the chat, but there is a really good point that was made about the fact that maybe he had it in his idea that he wanted to go after 2 years. But I don't know. Who knows? Only Anthony Gordon knows where that lies. But yeah, Guehi, really good centre half, I think, and Osula as well is a better option. Does another question for you in the chat? Do these two things? Were you concerned about the lack of noise, or were you like me in sort of understanding a little bit more about nuances of why the noises weren't coming out and the work was still carrying on anyway? Or and do these two rumours, regardless of who they are, the fact that there's two solid, tangible suggestions of signings, does that ease your fears, or do you feel now that there's less? Do you still feel a little bit like what's going on, and how do you feel about the fact that in the last 2 days there's been two major rumours, two major suggestions have come out of two signings? And also just put anything in chat. I'll keep this going on for as long as probably up to the next 5, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how much action there is in the chat. Understandably, there's less people in this live than there was last time because I didn't give you any notice at all. So really happy that you guys have joined me. So yeah, just let me know in the chat if you've got any more points to raise. Yeah, I think it's been I think personally it's really exciting that Newcastle. If you look at the bigger picture, have gone for Guehi and they've gone for Elise in a summer when they're supposed to not be after major players. That's kind of they've tempered the expectations and they've tempered these things. They've sort of suggested that maybe it wouldn't happen. But and also, like, if you look at other clubs in these situations, look at Villa. Villa in the Champions League and have had to sell two major players. Newcastle got in the Champions League. Newcastle aren't in the Champions League now, and they're still in a position where they don't have to sell anyone major. And no, Minter and Anderson were massive shames, but the fact that they are in a position that they are keeping those players, but also being linked with money moves like Guehi and Elise, who would come in and transform those positions. I think everyone would agree with that. Suggests that Newcastle are in a better position than many actually thought. Daniel says, I feel the lack of noise suggested that since Mitchell came in, the player searches started from scratch again, and the whole new shortlist was being drawn up, potentially. But I think actually it doesn't really. There's only so many good players in certain positions. I mean, there's not loads of really good players. It means that people might disagree on the odd player, but generally the market's kind of the same for the valuation of what you're looking for. Like, there's only a finite number of players in each position, so the emphasis might well have changed, and that might be a fact. Something to factor in, like people like Nicolas Gonzalez, who, if you didn't see my video on him a couple of weeks ago, he isn't somebody I really like the idea of. I think he scores a lot of goals, but doesn't create enough. And I like what I like about Anthony Gordon is that his goals and assists are sort of, his output is very 50-50 and very high on both counts, but it's spread out. It's not something that he's as impactful for the team as he is for himself, and I think that's why what Newcastle need to be looking for the next sign. What again? Here's another suggestion though. If they don't sign somebody at least by Southampton, what would you think of potentially maybe Barnes on the left and Gordon on the right? Because I think Gordon actually has been not quite as effective, but certainly not ineffective on the right when he's played there for Newcastle. And there's two quality players and two big money signings then getting into the team in positions that don't really affect how they play. As I say, certainly I think Barnes needs to play on the left. Don't get me wrong, but I think Gordon, as I say, he's much more versatile. He can play across that three centrally and either side. So, what do you think of potentially doing that against Southampton? Which player? This is from Captain again. Which player from any club do you think could spark a domino effect? That's a really interesting question. That one. It's interesting. So something like, I don't know, maybe like hypothetically, someone like Luis Diaz has been linked with a move from Liverpool. So if he goes, then they instantly would try probably to move for Gordon. Then Newcastle are looking for a winger from the list that they've got in the Premier League, and then suddenly it's very easy. Guehi's another one because I think any Premier League signing is likely to do that, especially a big player. So if Newcastle sign Guehi, then Palace will need another centre half. They'd also have a lot of money to spend on that centre half suddenly, and then they probably look for a Premier League player. They might look for someone in Germany or abroad with Glasner being there, but they tend to shop in for their key positions. They've always come from like the lower leagues in or the Premier League. If you look at Joachim Andersen, who's another centre half that Newcastle looked at, he really came to prominence at Fulham. All right, was on loan from Lyon, but that was where he sort of shone. Zaha was their own player who they brought back from Man United. Elise came up from Reading. Eze's come from QPR. So they've shopped domestically. So I think that's a really great question that I don't really know the answer to. But I think somebody like Guehi could absolutely do that. Whereas someone like Osula is somebody who I think Sheffield United they're more akin to a fire sale this summer because of their situation with relegation. Whereas Palace are actually, if you remember last season, they actually ended the season really well. So they've legitimately got aims of maybe challenging for Europe this year. So unless they get 60 million for Guehi, and I don't know what, I think his contract's 2 years as well, maybe 3. I think it is 2 years though. So similar to us with Gordon, there's a potential issue down the line. So maybe they'll look at it and think, okay, well, now's the time. Again, just talks. Other teams could come in, and there are some big clubs after a centre half, and there are some big clubs after Marc Guehi, by the sounds of it. I thought Barnes on the left and Gordon on the right would have been our setup last season, and he only tried it a couple of times last season. Yeah, I mean maybe, but also he was, by that point he's been injured, Barnes, for a long time. So that there is that as a fair point, but I think Barnes being injured really sort of put paid to that. But also he likes Miggy, doesn't he, Eddie Howe? I know that scares a lot of people, but I've covered what he thinks of Miggy, I think, in all seriousness, on the channel before. I think I was in a press conference with him at Hull where he kind of, to me at least, sort of confirmed that or not confirmed, but he sort of suggested that actually I think that his time is up at Newcastle. So I think something's going to change on that wing front, and I wouldn't rule out, if nothing in terms of a signing happens, that Barnes plays on the left and Gordon on the right. But I think Eddie Howe would prefer Gordon on the left if possible, and Barnes was just. I think they were last summer. I think they were very much in terms of looking for opportunistic moves rather than anything else. So yeah, I think that it's very very unlikely that'll be a permanent solution. But and in terms of Barnes coming in, was very much like he is seen as a competition for Gordon rather than an option for the other side, or to put Gordon on. I think so that they do want two of every position, and that it just arose that they could get those two sorted before they fix other problems, which I understand is frustrating for some fans. Chat's still going quite well. 16 people in there. It keeps fluctuating. But if there's anything else, you want to cover, any other points, make them now, because otherwise, I'll look at maybe wrapping it up. I'll be back on Monday for the Monday show, and unless somebody signs tomorrow, in which case I'll probably be back doing this again. But my aim is to do a live every Wednesday, and I was kind of curious to see how this would go in terms of, if I'm honest, a live that I didn't really give people warning for, and it's done fairly well. So I'm quite happy with it. But anything else before I head off that you have any thoughts on, let me know in the next couple of minutes. And then otherwise I'll see you on Monday. I think for me, this is going to be this last couple of days has sort of reinvigorated the idea that Newcastle are actually in a good position. And I think I understand why there's a lot of negativity, and has been. But as I've said, the only difference is that there's been no leaks rather than no work. And ultimately, while everyone panics and gets a little bit twitchy, you've just got to remember that they've got Paul Mitchell in. And Paul Mitchell, the irony of the whole the perfect situation, the perfect surmising of the situation, if you like, is that they got Paul Mitchell in when nobody expected it, nobody was reporting on it, and there was no leak. It just happened on a Thursday, and that was it. So that should give people a lot of, I think at least, some food for thought before the end of the window. It is still disappointing that they haven't got these players in before, because then we don't know how they would look and how they will look against Southampton, and how well these players, if they do come in, will just adapt, because traditionally players don't adapt particularly well to Eddie Howe's systems immediately. Anthony Gordon's been a great example of that, and obviously a couple of the other players who have come in have been injured almost immediately, or injured or out for another reason. In terms of Sandro Tonali, they've not really taken to it straight away for various different reasons. Only really Isak and Botman, I think, of the major signs, and probably Livramento as well, have sort of hit the ground running under Eddie Howe. And I think that's why there's a little bit of concern about maybe why they haven't done any deals. It feels like nobody else has got anything else to say in the chat. So I think from that point, I'll to wrap it up now. Thanks so much to everyone who's joined me. Let me know if you want more of these, if you're enjoying these lives. Really enjoy doing them, certainly. It's a lot easier on my in terms of planning. I don't have to plan the edit the videos, and I can get them out straight away. So it's really good to get involved, and also to meet the community and speak to you guys. So thanks so much for doing that, for joining me today. Like, share, and subscribe to the channel. I'll be back on Monday with the Monday show. Also going to be doing an update video in the next few days with a sort of a content plan, if you like, for the channel over the next season, in terms of Newcastle, but maybe some other content as well. So I'm really going big on the YouTube scene. I really enjoy doing these YouTube videos, really enjoy doing these lives particularly, and I'm so glad that you all got involved. And yeah, thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.